Commander Jake Morrison stared at the red lights flashing across his control panel. Every single one of them meant something bad. The engine was dead. Life support was failing. Communication systems were barely working. His ship, the Horizon's Edge, was dying in the middle of nowhere, and there was nothing he could do about it. "How long do we have?" Jake asked his chief engineer, a tired woman named Betty Cole who had been working for 18 hours. Straight, trying to fix the impossible. Betty wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at him with exhausted eyes. 4 days, maybe 5 if we shut down everything except minimal life support. The rescue ships from Station 7 won't get here for at least 8 days, sir. We're too far out. Jake felt his stomach drop. 73 people were on this ship. 73 lives depending on him to find a miracle. He looked around the bridge at his crew. Young faces, scared faces, but still working, still trying. His communications officer, Danny Wright, kept sending distress signals into the void, hoping anyone would hear them. "Keep trying," Jake said, trying to sound confident. "Someone will hear us?" But he didn't believe it. They were in the neutral zone, the empty space between territories where nobody went unless they had to. The chances of another ship passing through here were almost zero. The chances of that ship being willing to help a disabled human military vessel were even smaller. 3 hours passed. Then 6, the air was getting stale. People were starting to look pale. Jake made the hard decision to put non-essential crew into emergency sleep pods to save oxygen. It bought them maybe 1 extra day, but 1 day wouldn't be enough. Danny suddenly sat up straight at his station. "Commander, I'm picking up something. It's a ship. Not human. They're responding to our distress call." Jake felt a spark of hope, but he crushed it down. "What kind of ship?" "Signature matches Valkyrie design, sir. It's a merchant vessel. They're asking about our situation." Valkyrie. Jake knew about them. Small species, peaceful traders who mostly kept to themselves. They weren't part of any major alliance, didn't have much military power, and generally stayed away from conflicts. What was one of their ships doing out here? "Tell them our situation. Be honest. We need help badly." Danny worked his controls, sending the message. Minutes passed. Then the response came back. "Sir, they're changing course. They're coming to us. The captain says his name is Thelmar, and he's going to help." Jake couldn't believe it. A random merchant ship with no obligation to help, no alliance with humanity, nothing to gain, was coming to save them? It didn't make sense. In the cold mathematics of space politics, helping a disabled military vessel from another species was risky. If the wrong people found out, it could cause problems. Trade sanctions, political complications, even accusations of picking sides in conflicts. But Thelmar was coming anyway. 12 hours later, the Valkyrie ship Bright Current appeared on their sensors. It was smaller than the Horizon's Edge, clearly built for cargo rather than combat or long-range exploration. Jake watched through the viewscreen as the vessel carefully approached. Matching their drift, the Valkyrie captain's face appeared on the communication screen. Thelmar had the typical features of his species, slightly blue-tinted skin, large dark eyes, and a calm expression that seemed built into his face. He spoke in decent English, though with an accent. "Commander Morrison, I am Captain Thelmar. My crew and I will do everything we can to help you. We have oxygen reserves, some spare parts, and my engineer thinks he might be able to help get your engines working enough to reach safety." Jake felt something tight in his chest release just a little. "Captain Thelmar, I cannot thank you enough. Why are you doing this? You don't know us. This could cause you problems." Thelmar made a gesture that Jake's cultural database told him was similar to a human shrug. "Life is precious, Commander. It doesn't matter whose life it is. You need help, we can give help, so we give it. It's very simple." But it wasn't simple. Jake knew that. In the complicated politics of galactic relations, nothing was ever simple. But Thelmar made it sound like the most natural thing in the world. The next 18 hours were chaos. The Valkyrie crew worked alongside the human crew, despite language barriers and different equipment standards. Thelmar ordered his own oxygen reserves transferred to the Horizon's Edge. even though it meant his crew would be on tight rations for the rest of their journey. His engineer, a young Valkyrie named Shem, worked with Betty Cole to create a makeshift repair that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Jake watched Thelmar move through the corridors of his dying ship, calm and efficient, directing his crew with quiet authority. The Valkyrie brought food, medical supplies, even entertainment programs to help keep morale up. They treated the humans not as strangers or potential enemies, but as people who needed help. At one point, Jake found Thelmar in the engineering section, helping manually move a heavy power coupling. The Valkyrie captain wasn't young, and the work was clearly hard for him, but he didn't complain. "You really don't have to do this," Jake said. "Your crew has already done more than enough." Thelmar paused, breathing hard. "Commander, imagine if this was my ship dying and your ship passed by. Would you help us?" Jake didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely. Then why is it strange that I help you? We are both people. We both value life. The rest is just details." It was such a simple philosophy, but it struck Jake deeply. In his years of military service, he'd been trained to think about strategic advantages, political implications, and cost-benefit analyses. Thelmar just thought about saving lives because it was the right thing to do. Finally, after hours of desperate work, Betty Cole's voice came over the intercom. "Commander, we've got minimal engine power. It's not pretty, and it's not safe, but we can limp to the nearest station. We're going to make it." Cheers erupted throughout the ship. People hugged each other. Some cried. Jake felt his own eyes getting wet, but he blinked it away. He had to thank Thelmar properly. He found the Valkyrie captain preparing to return to his own ship. The Bright Current was ready to depart, having depleted its own reserves to save strangers. "Captain Thelmar," Jake said formally, "you saved 73 lives today. Human lives. We owe you a debt that we can never fully repay. Please, at least let us compensate you for the supplies and time you've lost." Thelmar waved his hand dismissively. "No payment needed, Commander. Life is payment enough. Knowing your people will continue living is all the reward necessary." Jake felt frustration and gratitude warring inside him. "Then at least give me your ship's identification codes, your home port, something. Let me record this officially. I want to make sure that humanity knows what you did for us." Thelmar looked puzzled but provided the information. Jake carefully entered everything into his official log, marking it with the highest priority flag. Then he did something unusual. He added a personal note to the file, something that would be preserved in the permanent military records. "Debt of honor," he typed. "Never forget. If the Valkyrie ever need us, we respond. No exceptions. No delays, no excuses. This is a standing order to all human forces to be maintained indefinitely. Signed, Commander Jake Morrison." He looked at Thelmar seriously. "Captain, I'm making you a promise right now. Humanity doesn't forget kindness. If you or your people ever need us, ever need help, we will be there. I don't care what it costs or how hard it is. We will be there." Thelmar smiled gently, clearly thinking it was just the emotional words of a grateful man who didn't really have much power to make such promises. "Thank you, Commander. That is kind of you to say. I hope your journey home is safe." They shook hands, human and Valkyrie, two captains who probably would never see each other again. Thelmar returned to his ship, and the Bright Current departed, jumping away into the darkness of space. Jake watched the Valkyrie ship disappear from sensors. Around him, his crew was celebrating their survival, but Jake was thinking about the future. He was just a commander of a single ship right now, but he was ambitious and capable. He would rise through the ranks. He would gain influence. And when he did, he would make sure that his promise meant something. Betty Cole approached him, looking curious. "Sir, I saw what you put in the log. Do you really think we'll ever see them again? The galaxy is huge. The chances of the Valkyrie ever needing our help specifically are pretty small." Jake kept staring at the empty space where the Valkyrie ship had been. "Maybe, maybe not. But if they do need us, we'll be ready. I'm going to make sure of it. Humanity should stand for something. Betty, We should be the kind of species that keeps our promises, that honors our debts, that remembers kindness. If we can be that, then maybe we'll deserve a place in this galaxy." Betty nodded slowly. "That's a nice thought, sir. I hope you get the chance to prove it." "So do I," Jake said quietly. The Horizon's Edge limped away toward the nearest station, its crew saved by the kindness of strangers who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Jake Morrison stood on his damaged bridge, already planning for a future where humanity would have the power to return the favor. He had no way of knowing that 20 years later, he would get exactly that chance and that his promise would change the course of galactic history forever. 20 years had passed since the Horizon's Edge incident. 20 years that had changed everything. Captain Thelmer was old now. His blue skin had faded to a lighter shade, and his movements were slower. He sat in the cramped passenger section of an evacuation transport, surrounded by frightened Valkyrie families. Children cried. Parents held them close. Everyone was trying not to panic, but fear filled the air like smoke. Through the small window, Thelmer could see his homeworld burning. Valkar had always been beautiful. 3 continents covered in silver forest, purple oceans, cities built with elegant architecture that blended with nature. The Valkyrie had lived peacefully here for thousands of years, building a civilization based on trade, art, and careful balance with their environment. They had no enemies because they threatened no one. They had no powerful military because they'd never needed one. Now, their peaceful existence was ending in fire. The Kryn Dominion had arrived 3 months ago. The Kryn were everything the Valkyrie were not: aggressive, expansionist, and brutally efficient. Their empire stretched across dozens of systems, built on conquest and exploitation. They discovered that Valkar's crust contained massive deposits of a rare mineral called theraxite, essential for advanced ship engines and weapon systems. The Kryn had offered to negotiate for mining rights, but everyone knew what Kryn negotiations meant. Accept their terms, become their servants, watch your world be stripped bare. When the Valkyrie Council refused, the Kryn showed their true intentions. The bombardment started 3 weeks ago. Kryn ships appeared in orbit and began destroying military installations. The Valkyrie had maybe 20 combat-capable ships. The Kryn brought over 200. It wasn't a war. It was an extermination. Thelmer closed his eyes, remembering his career as a merchant captain. Traveling between stars, meeting different species, making honest trades. He'd retired 5 years ago, thinking he'd spend his remaining time teaching young Valkyrie about the galaxy. Instead, he was fleeing his burning homeworld with whatever refugees his transport could carry. His daughter, Nemri, sat beside him, holding her young son. "Father, where will we go? Where can we go?" Thelmer had no answer. The Valkyrie had sent desperate messages to the Galactic Assembly, the loose coalition of major powers that supposedly maintained order and justice. They'd sent detailed evidence of Kryn war crimes, videos of civilian areas being bombed, refugee streams being attacked. They'd begged for help, for intervention, for anything. The responses had been disappointing. The Zelthan Republic sent thoughts and prayers. The Khorne Federation expressed concern. The Tarloxian Empire acknowledged the situation and suggested diplomatic channels. Every major power had reasons why they couldn't help. Some had trade agreements with the Kryn. Others didn't want to risk war over a small, insignificant species. Some simply didn't care. The Valkyrie were learning a hard lesson that many small species had learned before them. In the galactic community, power mattered more than justice. The strong did what they wanted. The weak suffered and hoped to survive. "We'll find somewhere," Thelmer told his daughter, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The Valkyrie diaspora was spreading across the galaxy, refugees begging for shelter on a dozen different worlds. Some places accepted them, others turned them away. All of them made it clear that the Valkyrie were alone on the bridge of the transport. The pilot was listening to multiple channels simultaneously. News reports, military updates, diplomatic channels. Most of it was bad. Valkyrie cities falling one after another. The planetary defense fleet reduced to scattered remnants. The government preparing to evacuate off Dashworld. Then something changed. The pilot sat up straight, adjusting his communications equipment. Wait, I'm picking up something strange. There's traffic on the emergency diplomatic channels. Multiple sources. It sounds like humanity? Thelmar's had snapped up. Humanity? What about them? I don't know. The signals are fragmented. But there's a lot of activity coming from human space. Something's happening? Across the galaxy in human territory. Something was indeed happening. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center on Earth, surrounded by screens showing star maps, fleet positions, and incoming reports. He'd risen far since his days as a commander of a single ship. Now he controlled significant portions of humanity's military forces. He had the ear of the Human Defense Council. He had influence and power. And for the first time in his career, he was using all of it for something that didn't make strategic sense: his aid. A sharp young officer named Lisa Grant approached with a tablet. Admiral, the analysis is complete. If we intervene in the Valkyrie situation, we risk a direct confrontation with the Kryn Dominion. They outgun us in most categories. Our military advisors estimate a 30% chance of significant human casualties. The economic cost would be substantial, and politically we'd be going against the consensus of the other major powers. Jake looked at the numbers on her tablet. Everything she said was correct. By every logical measure, intervening in the Valkyrie crisis was a bad idea. Humanity was still relatively new to galactic politics. They'd been spacefaring for only 80 years. They'd fought hard to build their reputation, establish their colonies, secure their trade routes. Getting into a war with a major power like the Kryn could set them back decades, but Jake kept thinking about an old Valkyrie captain who had risked everything to save strangers. What's the status of my request to the Defense Council? He asked. Lisa hesitated. They're divided, sir. About half think we should stay neutral. They argue that we can't save every species in trouble, that we need to think about human interests first. That this isn't our fight, and the other half? They think you're right. That humanity needs to stand for something more than just self-interest. That honoring our debts matters. But even among them, there's concern about the cost. Jake turned to look at a specific screen showing the Valkyrie home system. Red indicators marked Kryn fleet positions. Blue indicators, far fewer, showed the scattered remains of Valkyrie defenses. It was a slaughter happening in slow motion. He thought about Thelmar moving that power coupling, breathing hard, refusing payment for saving 73 lives. Life is payment enough, the old captain had said. Jake made his decision. Get me a direct link to the full Defense Council. Emergency priority. I'm going to make my case one more time, and this time I'm not taking no for an answer. 2 hours later, Jake stood before the council in the massive chamber where humanity's leaders made decisions that affected billions of people. Holographic representatives from Earth and every major colony attended. Military leaders, politicians, corporate representatives, colonial governors, all of them watching him. 20 years ago, Jake began, I was a commander of a dying ship. 73 people were going to die because we'd broken down in the middle of nowhere. Then a Valkyrie merchant captain named Thelmar found us. He had no obligation to help. Helping us could have caused him problems. He did it anyway. He depleted his own oxygen reserves, risked his crew, spent his resources. When I tried to pay him, he refused. He said life was payment enough. Jake pulled up an image of Valkar burning. Now that captain's world is dying. His people are scattered. They asked the galaxy for help, and the galaxy said no. Every major power has a reason why they can't help. Trade agreements, political considerations, strategic calculations. But the real reason is simple. Nobody thinks the Valkyrie matter enough to risk anything for. A council member from Mars Colony spoke up. Admiral, we sympathize with the Valkyrie situation, but we have to think about humanity's interests. We can't afford a war with the Kryn. Jake nodded. I understand that perspective. And if this was purely a strategic decision, you'd be right to be cautious. But this isn't just about strategy. This is about who we are as a species. What do we want humanity to stand for in this galaxy? He began pulling up more data, letting his passion show. For 80 years, we've been the newcomers. The species that everyone watches carefully because they're not sure what we'll do. We've tried to build a reputation as reliable, tough, and capable. But what good is any of that if we abandon the people who helped us when we were weak? A representative from Europa Station frowned. You're talking about one incident 20 years ago with one ship. That's not enough reason to risk a war, isn't it? Jake challenged. What kind of species are we if we forget kindness? If we only help people when it's convenient? The Valkyrie didn't calculate the risks before helping us. They just did it because it was right. I'm asking us to do the same. He switched the display to show intelligence reports. And there's another factor. The Kryn won't stop with Velkar. They're expansionist. Our analysts predict they'll push toward human space within 5 years. We can fight them now, when they're occupied, and we can choose the battlefield, or we can fight them later when they've grown stronger, and they choose the battlefield. That got their attention. Nothing motivated decision-makers like self-interest combined with moral justification. Jake pressed harder. I'm asking for authorization to assemble an intervention force. Not a token gesture, a real fleet, strong enough to make a difference. I know it's risky. I know it's expensive. But I believe this. The message went out across human space at maximum priority. Every colony from Earth to the distant frontier worlds received it. Every military installation, every defense station, every patrol ship. The words were simple, but carried weight that made commanders stop and read twice. The Valkyrie saved us when no one else would. Now it's our turn. All available ships rally at Staging Point Omega. We're going to war. The reaction was immediate and completely unexpected. At Mars Defense Station. Commander Helen Price read the message and immediately started calculating which ships she could spare. She'd never heard of the Valkyrie personally, but she'd heard stories about the Horizon's Edge incident. Every officer in the fleet had. It was taught in the academy as an example of unexpected kindness in a hostile galaxy. She sent orders to prepare 6 ships for departure. At Europa Colony. Governor Paul Chun wasn't military, but he controlled a fleet of armed mining vessels used for protecting operations in the asteroid belt. He read the message and thought about his grandfather, who'd been saved by strangers during Earth's last major war. He understood debts that crossed generations. He authorized 4 of his best ships to join the rally on the frontier world of New Haven. A retired captain named Martha Quinn was running a small shipping company. She was 70 years old, hadn't commanded a warship in a decade. But she remembered her training, remembered her oaths. She called her old crew, and within hours they'd fitted improvised weapons onto her cargo hauler. It wasn't much, but it was something. The stories multiplied across human space. Independent traders, corporate security forces, colonial militia, even civilian volunteers who wanted to help with logistics and evacuations. Everyone who could contribute something was answering the call. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the numbers climb at Staging Point Omega with growing amazement. He'd hoped for maybe 100 ships. He'd have been satisfied with 75. But the fleet assembling in the designated coordinates was far beyond anything he'd imagined. Lisa Grant kept updating the count. Admiral, we're now at 240 ships. And more are still arriving. Some of these vessels aren't even military. There's a group of mining ships from the Belt Consortium, 3 corporate security fleets, even some civilian transports volunteering for support roles. Jake stared at the tactical display showing the gathering armada. Each dot represented people who decided that humanity's honor was worth risking their lives for. It was humbling and terrifying at the same time. What about supplies? He asked. Do we have enough ammunition, fuel, medical supplies? Corporate donations are pouring in, sir. Apparently, your speech to the Defense Council leaked, and it's all over the human networks. Public opinion is strongly in favor of the intervention. Companies are competing to contribute. Some are doing it for publicity, but honestly, I don't care about their motives right now. Jake allowed himself a small smile. Humanity could be cynical and selfish, But they could also be surprisingly idealistic when something captured their imagination. The idea of keeping a 20-year-old promise to save a species that had helped them resonated with people, but his smile faded when he looked at the intelligence reports on Kryn forces. The Dominion had over 400 ships in or near Valkyrie space. They had better shields, better weapons, and decades more experience in large-scale warfare. Humanity's advantage was determination and unconventional tactics, but would that be enough? His chief tactical officer, Commander Greg Stone, approached with a worried expression. "Admiral, I've been running simulations. Even with our numbers, we're looking at heavy casualties. The Kryn have us outgunned in almost every category. We can hurt them, maybe even win, but the cost will be high." "I know," Jake said quietly. "Make sure every captain understands what they're getting into. No one's forced to fight. Anyone who wants to withdraw before we jump, I won't hold it against them." Greg nodded and went to send the message. An hour later, he returned. "Sir, I sent the offer. Nobody's withdrawing." A few captains sent back responses. One said, "We came here to keep humanity's promise." "We're not leaving," another said. "The Valkyrie stayed to help us. We'll stay to help them." Jake felt that tight feeling in his chest again. Pride, fear, responsibility, all mixed together. These people were putting their faith in him, and he was leading them into a battle that might kill many of them. Lisa interrupted his thoughts. "Admiral, we've located Captain Thelmer. He's alive on a refugee transport heading toward the outer system. Should I open a channel?" Jake took a deep breath. "Yes, let me talk to him." The holographic display shimmered and showed an old Valkyrie, much older than Jake remembered. Thelmar's skin was pale, his movements slow, but his eyes were still alert, still kind. "Captain Thelmer," Jake said, feeling emotions he hadn't expected. "Do you remember me?" "Commander Jake Morrison from the Horizon's Edge." Thelmer stared at the display, confusion turning to recognition. "Morrison? You are Admiral now. You have risen far. But why do you contact me?" "I am just an old refugee with nowhere to go." "Because I made you a promise 20 years ago. I told you that if your people ever needed us, humanity would be there." "We're here, Captain. We're coming to Valkar." Thelmar's expression went through several changes: disbelief, hope, fear. "You cannot be serious. The Kryn are too powerful. You will be killed for people you do not even know." "This is madness." Jake smiled. "Maybe, but it's human madness. We've assembled over 240 ships, and more are still coming. The entire human fleet is rallying to help the Valkyrie. Because 20 years ago, you helped us when you had no reason to." The old Valkyrie captain seemed to shrink, his eyes filling with liquid. "I saved one ship? One small ship with 73 people? This does not deserve an entire fleet-risking war. You saved 73 human lives when you could have just passed by. That matters to us. It matters a lot. We're going to save your people now, Captain. Not because it's strategic, not because we gain anything from it. Because it's right. Because you taught us that kindness should be remembered and repaid." Thelmer couldn't speak. He just stared at Jake with an expression of wonder and grief and hope all mixed together. Jake continued. "We'll be at Valkar in 26 hours. I want you to send a message to your government, to your people. Tell them humanity remembers. Tell them help is coming. Tell them they're not alone anymore." After the conversation ended, Jake turned to his assembled command staff. Dozens of officers from different ships, different backgrounds, all united in this single purpose. "Everyone understands the stakes," he said. "The Kryn will not expect us. They'll not understand why we're there. Use that confusion? We're not fighting a battle of attrition. We're fighting to break their will, to make them question whether Valkar is worth the cost." Greg pulled up tactical plans. "We've identified the Kryn flagship, the Sovereign Blade. If we can take it out or force it to retreat, the rest of their fleet might lose coordination." "But it's heavily defended." "Then we focus on it," Jake decided. "I don't care about winning elegantly. We fight human style, aggressive, unpredictable, and willing to take risks the Kryn would never take." Helen Price from Mars Station raised a concern. Admiral, what if the Kryn call for reinforcements? What if this escalates beyond the Valkyrie system? Jake had thought about this. Then we deal with that when it happens. But I'm betting the Kryn leadership will be shocked that a smaller power is challenging them at all. Their whole empire is built on the assumption that smaller species will always back down. We're going to prove them wrong. The meeting continued for hours, planning every detail they could. But Jake knew that no plan survived contact with the enemy. Once the fighting started, it would come down to courage, quick thinking, and sheer stubbornness. He dismissed the staff to prepare their ships. Alone in his command room, Jake pulled up the old log entry from 20 years ago. His younger self had written, "Humanity doesn't forget kindness. If the Valkyrie ever need us, we will be there." Now he was about to make good on that promise. He thought about all the people who were counting on him, the Valkyrie refugees hoping for salvation, the human crews risking their lives, the families waiting at home. The weight of it all was crushing, but he also thought about Thelmer, calmly helping strangers because life is precious. That simple philosophy had sparked something that was now changing the course of galactic events. Maybe that's what the galaxy needed more of, people willing to do the right thing even when it was costly. Even when it didn't make strategic sense, Lisa entered quietly. "Admiral, all ships report ready. We can jump to Velkar on your order." Jake stood up, straightening his uniform. "Send the order. All ships jump in 10 minutes. And Lisa?" "Yes, sir. Whatever happens in the next few days, make sure it's recorded properly. If we fail, I want people to know we tried. If we succeed, I want people to remember why we did it. This needs to mean something." Lisa nodded seriously. "It already means something, sir. To the Valkyrie, to our crews, to humanity. We're proving that we're more than just another species scrambling for advantage. We're proving that we keep our word." The countdown began. Across the massive fleet, hundreds of ships prepared to jump. Crews checked weapons, engineers verified engines. The Kryn Dominion's forces orbiting Velkar were efficient and methodical. Supreme Commander Vect stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Sovereign Blade, watching as his ship systematically reduced another Valkyrie city to rubble. It was almost boring. The Valkyrie had no real defense, no allies, no hope. Just another weak species learning that in the galaxy, strength was the only thing that mattered. His communications officer interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, we're detecting multiple jump signatures. Large fleet emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge." Vect barely glanced up. "Probably refugees fleeing. Let them go. We want the planet, not the headache of hunting down every transport ship." "No, sir. These are warships. Military vessels. Sensors indicate human design." That got Vec's attention. "Humans? What are they doing here?" He pulled up the tactical display and felt his first flutter of concern. The signatures kept appearing. Dozens of ships. Then hundreds. "How many ships are we detecting?" "Still counting, sir. Current estimate is over 200 vessels. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through." Admiral Jake Morrison's face appeared on the screen. Vect recognized him from intelligence briefings, a mid-ranked human officer, nothing particularly notable. But the human's expression was hard, determined. "Attention Kryn forces. This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Human Defense Fleet. 20 years ago, the Valkyrie saved human lives when they had no obligation to do so. We have not forgotten. The Valkyrie are now under human protection. You have 1 hour to withdraw all forces from Valkyrie space. After that, you are at war with humanity." Vect almost laughed. The audacity was remarkable. A species that had been spacefaring for barely a century was threatening the Kryn Dominion? "Open a response channel." Jake's image stabilized, waiting for his response. "Admiral Morrison," Vect said with amusement in his voice. "I appreciate the dramatic entrance, but you must realize how foolish this is. We outnumber you. We have superior technology. We have been conducting military operations when your species was still confined to a single planet. Withdraw now, and I will forget this happened. Stay, and I will destroy your fleet and then file a formal complaint with your government. Jake's expression didn't change. You have 59 minutes, Commander. I suggest you use them to prepare for departure. The channel closed. Vect stared at the blank screen, then at his tactical officer. This is absurd. They actually think they can fight us? His tactical officer, a veteran of dozens of campaigns, was less certain. Sir, intelligence on human combat doctrine is limited. They're relatively new to galactic warfare. But their record from internal conflicts and pirate suppression shows they favor aggressive, unconventional tactics. They're unpredictable. Unpredictable doesn't matter against superior firepower, Vec declared. But he was less confident than he sounded. The humans had assembled a significant fleet very quickly. That spoke to logistics and determination. Still, the Kryn had numbers and experience. It should be enough. The hour ticked down. Vect used it to reposition his forces, bringing in scattered patrol groups to concentrate his strength. If the humans wanted a battle, he would give them one that would teach them to stay out of Kryn affairs. Aboard his flagship, the human carrier Defiant, Jake watched the countdown. His hands were steady, but inside he was terrified. He was about to start a war. People were going to die. Humans, Valkyrie, even Kryn, all because he couldn't let go of an old promise. Lisa stood beside him. Admiral, all ships report ready. We're in attack formation. The Kryn are concentrating their forces around their flagship. Good, Jake said. That's what we want. They're thinking in traditional terms, big fleet battle, superior firepower wins. We're going to show them that doesn't always work. Greg Stone pulled up the battle plan. Phase 1 teams are ready. They know what to do. The countdown hit 0. Jake took a deep breath. All ships, engage. Execute plan swarm. The human fleet split apart in ways the Kryn weren't expecting. Instead of advancing in traditional formation, they scattered into smaller groups, each with specific targets. 50 ships broke off to engage the Kryn picket ships. Another group of fast attack craft accelerated at maximum speed toward the Kryn fleet's flanks. The remaining ships organized into 3 larger groups, each approaching from different vectors. VKT watched with growing frustration. What are they doing? This isn't standard formation. They're exposing themselves to concentrated fire. But the humans weren't where the Kryn expected them to be. The small fast attack craft were already among the outer Kryn ships, moving too quickly for the larger vessels to target effectively. They weren't trying to destroy the Kryn ships. They were targeting sensors, communications arrays, engine pods. Precision strikes that disabled without necessarily killing, one of Vec's commanders reported. Sir, we're losing coordination. Our outer squadrons can't communicate effectively. The humans are using some kind of electronic warfare we haven't seen before. Jake watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. That's it. Keep them confused. Phase 2 teams, begin your runs. The next wave of human ships came in fast and low, skimming dangerously close to Velkar's atmosphere. They weren't attacking the Kryn fleet directly. Instead, they were targeting the Kryn ground installations, the bases the invaders had established on the planet's surface. Precision strikes took out landing zones, supply depots, command centers. VKT realized the humans weren't trying to win a traditional fleet battle. They were trying to make the occupation unsustainable. All ships ignore the small craft. Focus fire on their main groups. Destroy their capital ships. The Kryn fleet's firepower was devastating when concentrated. 3 human cruisers took heavy damage, 1 destroyed outright. Jake watched good people die and forced himself not to look away. This was his decision. He owned every death, but the humans didn't retreat. The damaged cruisers kept fighting even as they burned. One captain, Henry Blake, commanded a destroyer that had lost main power and life support. Rather than evacuate, he used his remaining maneuvering thrusters to aim his ship at a Kryn heavy cruiser. Lisa gasped. Sir, the Endeavour is on a collision course. Captain Blake isn't responding to hails. Jake understood immediately. Get his crew off. Emergency evacuation shuttles now. But Blake was already executing. The Endeavour, trailing atmosphere and burning debris, accelerated on emergency power straight into the Kryn cruiser. The explosion was massive, taking out both ships and damaging two others nearby. The Kryn were shocked. Who deliberately crashed their own ship? What kind of species did that? Vect felt the first real fear. These humans were insane. They weren't fighting like rational beings trying to minimize losses. They were fighting like people who valued their cause more than their own survival. "Sir," his tactical officer reported urgently, "3 more human ships are showing similar behavior. They're not retreating when damaged. They're using themselves as weapons." Vect made a snap decision. Pull back from the planet. Reform the fleet in high orbit. We need to establish proper defensive positions. But pulling back meant giving up the ground installations, meant losing months of work. Jake saw the Kryn fleet adjusting and pressed the advantage. All ships pursuit. Don't let them regroup cleanly. The battle turned into chaos. The Kryn were better armed and better shielded, but the humans were everywhere, refusing to fight predictably. Small craft darted in and out, targeting weak points. Larger ships worked in coordinated groups, covering each other's weaknesses. Every time the Kryn tried to concentrate fire, the humans scattered and came from another angle. Martha Quinn, the 70-year-old retired captain in her converted cargo hauler, found herself facing a Kryn destroyer. Her ship was outgunned by every measure. But she'd loaded her cargo bay with improvised missiles, literally just cargo containers filled with explosives and fitted with basic guidance systems. "This is insane," her co-pilot muttered. "Absolutely," Martha agreed, and launched her entire cargo hold at point-blank range. The Kryn destroyer's shields were designed for military weapons, not for dozens of random explosive containers coming from unexpected angles. Several got through, tearing into the hull. The destroyer didn't explode, but it was crippled, drifting. Across the battlefield, similar stories played out. The human corporate security forces fought with their mining equipment adapted for combat. Civilian transports jammed communications. Every human ship, regardless of size or capability, found ways to contribute. Vect watched his fleet taking damage from what should have been an inferior force. His casualty reports were climbing. Not catastrophic yet, but steady, grinding. And worst of all, his ships were starting to hesitate. Crews that had thought this would be easy were now facing an enemy that seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses. "Sir, the humans are focusing fire on us. Sovereign Blade is being targeted by at least 15 ships." Vect looked at the tactical display. The humans had identified his flagship and were throwing everything at it. That made sense tactically, but the ferocity was unnerving. Ships that should have been retreating to repair were staying in the fight, covering each other, coordinating like they'd fought together for years instead of days. Jake watched the Sovereign Blade's shields flickering under sustained fire. 3 weeks after the battle, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the main plaza of Velkar's capital city. The place was still scarred from Kryn bombardment. Buildings showed blast damage. Streets had been hastily repaired, but the city was alive, filled with Velkari who had returned to their homes instead of dying as refugees in space. Around him stood his senior officers and the crews of the ships that had fought. They'd cleaned up as best they could, but everyone looked tired. 3 weeks of helping with reconstruction, providing supplies, setting up defensive positions in case the Kryn came back. It had been exhausting work, but today was important. Today, the Velkari were holding a ceremony to honor the humans who had saved them. Captain Thelmer approached Jake slowly. The old Velkari looked even more fragile than before, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there weeks ago. Hope, maybe. Or purpose regained. "Admiral Morrison," Thelmer said formally, then smiled. "Or should I still call you Commander?" I remember a younger human, so worried about his crew. Jake clasped his hand gently. "Jake is fine. And I remember a merchant captain who could have passed by a dying ship but chose to help instead." "That was so long ago," Thelmer said quietly. "I did not think it mattered." Just a small kindness. It mattered, Jake assured him. It changed everything. The ceremony began. The Valkyrie High Council had arranged for a monument to be built in record time. It stood at the center of the plaza, made from metal salvaged from both Valkyrie and human ships lost in the battle. The design was elegant, two hands reaching toward each other. One clearly human, one Valkyrie almost touching. The names were carved into the base. Every human who had died in the battle. 8,416 names. Jake ran his hand over them, feeling the carved letters. Henry Blake, Martha Quinn, so many others. They'd given everything to keep humanity's promise. The Valkyrie leader, Prime Minister Shedan, spoke to the crowd. Her voice was amplified across the plaza, where tens of thousands had gathered. We called out to the galaxy for help, and the galaxy ignored us. We had given up hope. We believed we would die scattered and alone. Then humanity came. Not because they had to, not because we could offer them anything. They came because 20 years ago, one of us helped them, and they remembered. She turned to look at Jake. Admiral Morrison, you told Commander Vec that the Valkyrie were under human protection. Those words saved our civilization? We are forever in your debt? Jake stepped forward to speak. Public speaking had never been his strength, but this was important. Prime Minister, you owe us nothing. Captain Thelmer and his crew saved 73 human lives when they could have just continued on their way. That debt has been repaid. What happens now is not about debt. It's about friendship. He looked out at the crowd, seeing Valkyrie faces looking back at him with gratitude and wonder. My species is still new to the galaxy. We're still learning how things work out here. But we've decided something important. We've decided that we want to be the kind of people who keep their promises, who remember kindness, who help our friends when they need us. The Valkyrie taught us that lesson. Now we're going to carry it forward. The ceremony continued with speeches and honors. But Jake was thinking about the bigger picture. The battle at Velkar had sent shockwaves through the galactic community. He'd been receiving messages from all over. Some were angry. The Kryn Dominion had filed formal protests with the Galactic Assembly, claiming unprovoked human aggression. Several species that had trade agreements with the Kryn were making uncomfortable, diplomatic noises, but other messages were different. Smaller species that had been ignored or threatened by larger powers were reaching out, not asking for protection, but asking about alliances, about trade, about friendship. They'd seen that humanity was willing to fight for their friends, and that meant something in a galaxy where most species only looked out for themselves. Lisa found him after the ceremony. Admiral, the Defense Council is requesting your presence at a conference next week. They want to discuss the implications of what we've done. Implications? Jake repeated. That's a polite way of saying they're worried about the political fallout. Some of them are, Lisa admitted. But others are seeing opportunities. We've received inquiries from 47 different species about establishing formal relations. Trade proposals, defense pacts, cultural exchanges. The galaxy is looking at humanity differently now. Jake understood. Before Velkar, humanity was just another minor species, interesting maybe, but not particularly important. Now they were seen as unpredictable, dangerous, but also honorable. People weren't sure what to make of that combination. Greg Stone approached with a tactical pad. Admiral, our intelligence division has completed their analysis of the Kryn withdrawal. The Dominion leadership is in chaos. Supreme Commander Vecht has been relieved of command for failing to secure Velkar. There are debates in their High Council about whether to risk another engagement with us. Current assessment is that they'll avoid conflict with humanity for at least the next several years. Which was the goal, Jake said. We didn't need to destroy them. We just needed to make them think twice about attacking us or our friends. A young Valkyrie approached hesitantly. She was maybe 12 years old, clutching a small carved stone. She looked at Jake nervously, then thrust the stone toward him. For you, she said in careful English. You saved my family, my city. Thank you. Jake took the stone gently. It was carved with symbols he didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. Thank you. What's your name? Murray, the girl said. My grandfather is Captain Thelmar. He talks about you all the time. About the promise you made? Jake knelt down to her level. Your grandfather is one of the bravest people I've ever met. He taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing to do. I'll keep this stone to remember that lesson. Lemrie smiled and ran back to her family. Jake stood up, tucking the stone carefully into his pocket. Over the next few days, Jake met with various delegations. Some were from species humanity had barely heard of before. Others were from minor powers that wanted to discuss mutual defense. All of them had the same basic message. We saw what you did. And we want to talk about what it means. A delegation from the Morvani Union was particularly interesting. They were a peaceful species that controlled several resource-rich systems, but had limited military capability. Their representative, a diplomat named Koth, was direct. Admiral Morrison, we have watched the galactic powers play their games for centuries. We trade with everyone, offend no one, and hope that we're too useful to conquer. It is not a comfortable existence. When we saw what humanity did for the Velkari, we started to wonder if there might be another way. Jake listened carefully. What way is that? An alliance of smaller species, united not by force or conquest, but by mutual respect and shared values. The Velkari could not stand alone against the Kryn, but if they had friends, real friends willing to help, they would not have been in danger at all. It was an interesting idea. Jake had been thinking along similar lines. What would such an alliance look like? Koth leaned forward. We bring resources, technology, knowledge. Humanity brings military capability and something more rare, a reputation for keeping promises. Together we are strong enough that the major powers must respect us. Strong enough to protect each other. Jake promised to bring the proposal to the Human Defense Council. It would take time to develop, but the seed was planted. A new power block in the galaxy, based not on domination but on partnership, the Galactic Assembly called a special session to discuss the Velkar incident. Jake attended as humanity's representative. The massive chamber was filled with delegates from hundreds of species. Some looked at him with respect, others with suspicion, a few with barely concealed hostility. The Kryn delegate spoke first, his voice full of outrage. The humans attacked Kryn forces in a flagrant violation of galactic law. We demand sanctions and reparations. Jake waited for his turn to speak. When it came, he stood calmly. The Velkari requested help. The galactic community ignored them. Humanity responded. We make no apologies for defending our friends. If that violates some law, then the law needs to change. There was murmuring throughout the chamber. The Zelfin ambassador, representing one of the major powers, stood up. Admiral Morrison, humanity's actions, while perhaps morally motivated, have disrupted the established order. What gives you the right to intervene in regional conflicts? What gave the Kryn the right to invade Velkar? Jake countered. The Velkari appealed to this assembly for help. Every major power had reasons why they couldn't help. Where was the established order when Velkari cities were burning? The Corn Federation's representative tried a different approach. We understand humanity's position. But you must recognize that you've set a dangerous precedent. If every species starts fighting for their friends, we'll have chaos. Jake looked around the chamber. Is it chaos to honor your commitments? To protect the innocent? To remember kindness? If so, then humanity chooses chaos. We will not become the kind of species that calculates the strategic value of friendship. The debate continued for hours. In the end, no formal action was taken against humanity. The major powers were divided and none wanted to.